You're tuned into the podcast Sentimental Journey, where discussions happen on the music of the World War II era. My name is Hollis Zimmerman, and I will be exploring this important time in music history. Hello, and welcome to Sentimental Journey. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to briefly examine the female musical entertainers and crooners that made an impact during the World War II era, with a special focus on the Andrews sisters, Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Shore. The 1940s is when Europe was in conflict and the United States government was preparing for a possible war. Military funding increased and the Selective Service Draft was in effect on September 1940. Then after the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, the United States entered World War II. As American servicemen began to leave for distant shores, the songs of the female artists and groups added to the soundtrack for World War II and made an impact on the war efforts. During World War II, women played a role in filling many different positions, including making music, while men were fighting in combat. Most people know that women were called up to work in factories during World War II, such as the iconic Rosie the Riveter, but few were probably aware that women also stepped forward to help the war effort by making music. Be a Marine, a free man to fight. This is a well-known slogan from World War II, used to recruit women to fill the place of men's positions. Traditionally, women have always held roles in the military, serving as nurses, clerks, or cleaners. Their involvement in the military increased to a new degree in 1942 when the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps formed, creating a separate unit for women to join the military. In the following year, all other branches created female units. Among the variety of positions created in female units during World War II, one job involving a women's band. Each branch of the military at this point had a women's band, with the first being in 1942 by the Women's Auxiliary Corps, following by each other's branch by forming a band by 1943. These bands were utilized to boost morale, travel to raise money for the military effort, and create opportunities for women to gain positions such as performing musicians. By 1940, 80% of American households who would own a radio began making American music far more accessible for civilians and soldiers alike. Unlike many World War I songs, World War II songs focused more on romance and strength instead of propaganda, morale, and patriotism. During World War II, American music helped to inspire servicemen and people working in the war industries. Popular female entertainers of the time included Frances Langford, Marlene Dietrich, Dinah Shore, Lola Falana, Judy Garland, Rita Hayworth, Betty Grable, Ginger Rogers, and the Andrews sisters. In 1941, the United States Service Organizations, also known as the USO, were just established prior to the U.S. entry into World War II. Many of music's top names and entertainers contributed to the war effort by offering performances for the military and their families through the USO performances. Some of the regular performers included the Andrews sisters, Marlene Dietrich, Judy Garland, Rita Hayworth, and Joan Crawford. A crooner is a term used to describe primarily singers who perform using a smooth style made possible by better microphones, which picked up quieter sounds and a wider range of frequencies, allowing the singer to utilize more dynamic range and perform in a more intimate manner. The crooning style developed out of the singers who performed with big bands and reached its height during the 1940s. Female crooning is epitomized by Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Shore during World War II. The microphone was key to being a crooner. It allowed singers to use a nuanced vocal palette and remain audible while singing softly. Many perceive this sort of singing, labeled crooning, as intimate and romantic. The Andrews sisters were a close harmony female singing trio that made a tremendous impact during the World War II era. They were one of the most prominent female entertainment acts of the 1940s. Their career lasted from 1925 to 1967. Laverne was born on July 6, 1911, followed by Maxine on January 3, 1916, and finally Patricia on February 16, 1918. Patty, Maxine, and Laverne Andrews grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota as daughters of Greek and Norwegian. Patty, the youngest and lead singer of the Andrews sisters, started the group when she was 7 years old and formed it. 12 years old when they won the first prize at a talent contest at the local Orpheum Theater in Minneapolis. Following the collapse of their father's Minneapolis restaurant, the sisters went on the road to support the family. As teenagers, they began performing in vaudeville revues throughout the Midwest. Patty Andrews, a soprano, was the lead singer for the trio. Maxine sang second soprano, and Laverne took the lowest line. Their singing was influenced by the Dixieland style of the Boswell sisters, who were popular in the 1930s. The group sang with various bands for several radio broadcasts while they were struggling during the mid-1930s to establish their reputation. A failed radio performance in 1937 turned out to be the sisters' big break. Although they were fired as soon as the night on the Saturday Night Swing Club program, they signed to a recording contract by Decca Records executive who heard the broadcast. The girls made their very first recordings with There's a Lull in My Life, Jammin', and Wake Up and Live. They first came to national attention with their recordings and radio broadcast in 1937, most notably their major Decca record hit, To Me, You Are Beautiful. The recording was released after Christmas of 1937. By New Year's Eve, it had become the most popular song on New York radio stations, and it went on to become the first million-selling record by a female singing group. Their contract was immediately revised by Decca, and throughout the rest of the decade of the 1930s, they recorded hit after hit, and their first two duets with Bing Crosby in 1939, Sirabin and Yodelin' Jive. And in their years before and during World War II, the Andrews sisters were at the height of their popularity, nicknamed America's wartime sweethearts. They became great favorites of the American troops overseas. They appeared in a number of films supporting Abbott and Costello and Buck Private in the Navy and Hold That Ghost, all in 1941. They also appeared in their own series of musical comedies, which included Private Buckaroo from 1942, What's Cookin', and Swing Time Johnny from 1943. The Andrews sisters performed for troops at the United Service Organizations, showcases around the world, and released peppy songs about the soldiers' experiences, such as the 1941's Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. The song, which tells the story of a virtuosic musician who becomes drafted into the U.S. Army, became the Andrews sisters' signature hit. During the war, they entertained Allied forces extensively in Africa and Italy, as well as the U.S., visiting Army, Navy, Marine, and Coast Guard bases, war zones, hospitals, and munitions factories, and they encouraged U.S. citizens to purchase war bonds with their rendition of the Irving Berlin song, Any Bonds Today. They also helped actress Bette Davis and actor John Garfield found California's famous Hollywood Canteen, a welcome retreat for servicemen where the trio often performed, volunteering their personal time to sing and dance for the soldiers, sailors, and Marines. While touring, the Andrews sisters often treated random servicemen to dinner while they were dining out. They recorded a series of V-discs for distribution to the Allied forces only, again volunteering their time for studio sessions for the music branch, a special service division of the Army Air Service Air Forces, and they were dubbed Sweethearts of the Armed Forces Radio Service for many of their appearances on shows such as Command Performance, Mail Call, GI, and GI Journal. The Andrews sisters continued to have hits throughout the World War II era, including Hold Tight, Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me, Rum and Coca-Cola, Beer Barrel Polka, and Accentuate the Positive. The sisters' 1945 hit Rum and Coca-Cola became one of their most popular and best-known recordings. The song was based on a Trinidad calypso, which brought calypso to the United States. Still in highly demand in the recording studio, on radio, and on stage and in clubs, the Andrews sisters appeared in Paramount's The World Turns Backward from 1947 and teamed up with Bing Crosby on You Don't Have to Know the Language. The picture was the highest-grossing film of that year. The Disney company also utilized the girls' voices in their cartoon features, such as Make Mine Music and Melody Time. Toward the late 1940s, the Andrews sisters were going through a lot of hardships. The girls squabbled over their parents' estate shares and individual career desires. The trio reunited in 1956 and signed to a new record deal with Capitol Records. Patty and Maxine continued for a while, with singer Joyce DeYoung rounding their trio. None of these achieved major success. They toured during the 1960s, favoring nightclubs in Las Vegas, Nevada, California, and London, England. Eldest sister Laverne died in 1967 at the age of 55 after a year-long bout with cancer, during which she was replaced by singer Joyce DeYoung. Their last appearance together was on the Dean Martin Show on September 29, 1966. After Laverne died, Maxine and Patty continued to perform periodically until 1968. Patty and Maxine's careers experienced a resurgence when Bette Midler covered Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy in 1973. The next year, the pair debuted on Broadway in the Sherman Brothers' nostalgic World War II musical, Over Here. The Andrews Sisters became the most popular female group of the first half of the 20th century. They sold 75 to 100 million records and sold over 600 recorded tunes. The act was also hugely popular in live performance and in film. Well, next I'm going to talk about Ella Fitzgerald. She was one of the most popular female crooners during World War II. She was born on April 25, 1917 in Newport News, Virginia. She was the daughter of William Fitzgerald and Temperance Henry. Her parents were unmarried but lived together on the East End section of Newport News for at least 2.5 years after she was born. In the early 1920s, Fitzgerald's family moved to Yonkers in Westchester County, New York. By 1925, Fitzgerald and her family had moved to a nearby School Street, a poor Italian area. Starting in the 3rd grade, Fitzgerald loved dancing and admired Earl Snake Hips Tucker. She performed for her peers on the way to school and in lunchtime. She and her family were active in the Bethany African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she attended worship services, Bible study, and Sunday school. The church also provided Fitzgerald with her early experiences in music. Fitzgerald also listened to jazz recordings by Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, and the Boswell sisters. In 1932, when Fitzgerald was 15, her mother died from injuries sustained in a car accident. Her stepfather took care of her until April 1933, when she moved to Harlem to live with her aunt. While she seems to have survived during 1933 and 1934, in part from singing on the streets of Harlem, Fitzgerald made her most important debut at the age of 17 on November 21, 1934, in one of the earliest amateur nights in the Apollo Theater. She had intended to go on stage and dance, but she was intimidated by a local dance duo called the Edwards Sisters and opted to sing instead. Performing in the style of Connie Boswell, she sang Judy and the Object of My Affection and won first prize. She had the chance to perform at Apollo Theater for a week, but seemingly because of her disheveled appearance, the theater never gave her that part of the prize. In January 1935, Ella Fitzgerald won the chance to perform for a week with Tiny Bradshaw Band at the Harlem Opera House. She was introduced by band leader Chick Webb, who had asked his recently signed singer Charlie Linton to help him find a female singer. She was so successful that she soon hired drummer and band leader Chick Webb to travel with his band. The pay was $12.50 a week. She gained acclaim as part of the group's performances at the Harlem Savoy Ballroom. Fitzgerald recorded several hit songs, including Love and Kisses, If You Can't Sing It, You'll Have to Swing It, but it was her 1938 version of the nursery rhyme A Tisket a Tasket, a song that she co-wrote, which became a major hit on the radio and was also the biggest selling records of the decade. While performing with Webb, Fitzgerald made several important recordings with Decca Records. Chick Webb died of a spinal tuberculosis on June 16, 1939, and his band was named Ella and Her Famous Orchestra, with Fitzgerald taking the role of band leader. She recorded nearly 150 songs with the orchestra between 1935 and 1942. In addition, she performed songs that she also recorded with the Benny Goodman Orchestra. She had her own side project, too, known as Ella Fitzgerald and Her Savoy 8. In 1942, with her increasing dissident and money concerns in Fitzgerald's band, Famous Orchestra, she continued to work as the lead singer with the Three Keys, and in July, her band played her last concert at the Earl Theater in Philadelphia. While working for Decca Records, she had hits with Bill Kenny and the Ink Spots, Louis Jordan, and the Delta Rhythm Boys. She also started to incorporate different techniques and tunes while calling on bebop and timing scat vocals in her performances and recordings. With the demise of the swing era and the decline of the great touring big bands, a major change in jazz music occurred. The advent of bebop led into new developments in Fitzgerald's vocal style, which was influenced by her work in Dizzy Gillespie's band. With the U.S. entry into war, many performers contributed to the war effort by volunteering their time and talent. Just entering the peak of her career, Fitzgerald continued a rigorous touring schedule across the country during the war years and often shared a bill with the Ink Spots. In addition, she still performed with large and small shows along the way for those in service. Ella Fitzgerald also performed with the United Service Organizations during World War II. In June of 1942, Ella Fitzgerald was billed as a special attraction along with Lena Horne and her 8 star-studded big bands lineup at the USO benefit dance at the Golden Gate Ballroom in Harlem, New York. She had just turned 24. During this period, Fitzgerald was also a popular performer on the radio show Jubilee, broadcast by the Armed Forces Radio Network from 1942 to 1953. This show, one of over 100 shows sent overseas by the AFRN, featured African American musicians and singers and was intended to be aimed at black listeners in the United States Armed Forces. Because the show was featured in many unique and unknown acts, in addition to stars like Ella Fitzgerald, the show's recordings are the only traces of some of the broadcast performers. On May 31, 1944, Fitzgerald had a special honor when she opened the door to a new outdoor amphitheater at the northern edge of the Tuskegee Army Airfield. Ella Fitzgerald left behind an astounding body of work with more than 200 albums and 2,000 recorded songs. She earned 13 Grammy Awards and influenced countless artists and touched many lives with her civil rights advocacy. Fitzgerald's charity work on behalf of children was spurred on by World War II. Shortly after the war, Fitzgerald funded a spot in a home for a war orphan in Naples. Throughout her life, she has remained a champion of children, inspired by her own personal tragedy to help orphans and disadvantaged children. Well, finally, I'm going to talk about Dinah Shore. She was another well-known female vocalist that made an impact during the World War II era. She was born as Fannie Rose Shore to Jewish Russian immigrant shopkeepers in Winchester, Tennessee. When Fannie was about 18 months old, she was stricken with polio. The only treatment was bed rest and sometimes more extreme care if the child was severely compromised. By her 5th grade year, her family had moved to Nashville, where she completed elementary school. Although shy because of her limp, she became actively involved in sports and was a cheerleader at Nashville's Hume Fogg High School and was involved in other activities. At some point, Fannie became known as Frances. Shore enrolled in Vanderbilt University, where she participated in many events and activities, including the Chi chapter of the Alpha Epsilon Phi sorority. She graduated from the university in 1938 with a degree in sociology. After failing auditions with the bands of Benny Goodman and both Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey, Shore struck out on her own. She became the first singer of her era to achieve solo success. She visited the Grand Ole Opry and made her radio debut on Nashville's WSM AM radio station. Shore decided to pursue her career in singing, moving her to New York City on audition for orchestras and radio stations. In many of her auditions, she sang the popular song Dinah by Ethel Waters. When disc jockey Martin Block could not remember her name, he called her Dinah Girl, and soon after the name stuck, becoming her stage name, Dinah Shore. He couldn't remember that up-and-comer's name, so he called her Dinah Girl. Soon after she arrived in New York in 1937, in age 21, Shore made her very first television appearances on experimental broadcasts for NBC overstation W2XBS in New York, otherwise known now as WNBC. She eventually was hired as a vocalist at radio station WNEW, where she sang with Frank Sinatra. She recorded and performed with the Xavier Cugat Orchestra and signed a recording contract with RCA Victor Records in 1940. In March of 1939, Shore debuted on on national radio on Sunday afternoon CBS program Ben Burney's Orchestra. In February 1940, she became a featured vocalist on the NBC radio program The Chamber Music Society of Lower Basin Street, a showcase for traditional Dixieland and blues songs. With Shore, the program became so popular that it was moved from 4:30 on Sunday afternoon to 9 p.m. on Monday at nighttime time slot. Her primetime debut was introduced as Mademoiselle Dinah Shore, who starts a fire by rubbing two notes together. She recorded with the Basin Street bands for RCA Victor. Shore's singing came to the attention of Eddie Cantor. She signed her as a regular on his radio show Time to Smile in 1940. Shore credits him for teaching her self-confidence, comedic timing, and the ways of connecting with an audience. Cantor brought the rights to an adapted Ukrainian folk song with new lyrics by Jack Lawrence for Shore to record for RCA Victor's Bluebird label. This song, Yes, My Darling Daughter, became her first major hit, selling 500,000 copies in weeks, which was unusual for that time. Shore became a successful singing star with her own radio show, Call for Music, which was broadcast on CBS from February 13, 1948 to February 16, 1948. And on NBC from April 20th, 1948 to June 29th, 1948. Also in 1943, she appeared in her first movie, Thank You, Lucky Stars, starring Eddie Cantor. She went on to have another radio show, Paul Whiteman Presents. During that time, the United States was involved in World War II, and Shore became a favorite with the troops. She had hits including Blues in the Night, You'd Be Nice to Come Home To, and I'll Walk Alone, which was the first of her #1 hit. The Blues in the Night sold over 1 million copies and was awarded a gold disc by the RIAA. During World War II, Dinah Shore participated in command performance programs for Armed Forces Radio and traveled to Europe to entertain troops in person. She was also a regular at the Hollywood Canteen. The memories she created for the troops who also saw her perform left lasting impressions. Dinah Shore was also a hit with the troops and made appearances in Normandy and other Allied bases in Europe. She did one tour visiting hospitals and GIs in which she sang more than 150 songs in over 11 straight hours. She made numerous appearances on the Armed Forces Radio live show Command Performance, popular with the troops. To support the troops overseas, Dinah Shore participated in USO tours to Europe. She made many appearances entertaining the United States Armed Forces, for which she was awarded the USO Medallion. She appeared in person, on radio, and on record with a number of British and American stars, including Major Glenn Miller and his large Army Air Force band. She met George Montgomery, a young actor getting ready to go into the military service. They married on December 3, 1943, shortly before he went into service. When he returned, they settled in San Fernando, California. Dinah Shore continued to appear in radio shows throughout the 1940s, including the Bird's Eye Open House and the Ford Radio Show. She starred in 7 radio series of her own between 1941 and 1954. In early 1946, she moved to a new label, CBS-owned Columbia Records. At Columbia, she enjoyed the greatest commercial success of her recording career, starting with her first Columbia single release, Shoe Fly and Apple Pan Dowdy, and peaking with the most popular song of 1948, Buttons and Bows. With her most popular recordings was the holiday perennial Baby It's Cold Outside with Buddy Clark in 1949. Shore was a musical guest in the films Thank You, Lucky Stars, Follow the Boys, Until the Clouds Roll By, and had starring roles in Danny Kaye's debut Up in Arms in 1944 and The Belle in the Yukon. She left her musical voice to 2 Disney films, Make Mine Music and Fun and Fancy Free. 12 years later, in 1949, she made her commercial television debut on The Ed Wynn Show from Los Angeles over CBS, and on Easter Sunday, 1950, made a guest appearance on Bob Hope's first television show on NBC. In 1950, she returned to RCA Victor with a deal to record 100 sides for $1 million. The hits just kept on coming, but with less frequency, and were not charting as high as in the 40s. Several duets with Tony Martin did as well, A Penny a Kiss, A Penny a Hug in 1951. After several guest spots on television shows, she was given her own program, The Dinah Shore Show, on NBC on November 27, 1951. on. It was the first network show hosted by a woman. In 1956, the show's name changed from the Dinah Shore Chevrolet Show, in which she sang the famous song, "See the USA in Your Chevrolet." The show continued successfully until 1963 when it was taken off the air. During the history of the Dinah Shore Show, from 1951 to 1956, Shore sang and had guests who performed frequently. In 1956, the Dinah Shore Chevrolet Show, a one-hour musical variety show, came into being, and she became even more famous singing her trademark song, "See the USA in Your Chevrolet." Dinah Shore was one person in the 1950s and the early 1960s responsible for putting Chevrolet automobiles in driveways and garages of millions of Americans. In doing shows, she became the queen of General Motors. The show remained high in ratings for 7 seasons. By 1956, Dinah Show was expanded to 1 full hour, now named the Dinah Shore Chevy Show. Dinah Shore contributed to Americans' entertainment for over 40 years. During wartime, she projected an image of home. From 1970 to 1980, Dinah Shore hosted one of the first TV talk shows, Dinah. Dinah Shore rose to prominence as a popular female artist in the World War II era. She had a string of 80 charted popular hits spanning 1940 to 1957. After appearing in a handful of feature films, that she went on for a 4-decade career in American television. Well, let me tell you, I truly agree that women played a significant role in the war efforts. In 1942, they created the Women's Auxiliary Corps and gave them the right to join the military. I believe it truly takes everyone to fight for rights in our country. There were so many great representations and campaigns during World War II at that time that included Rosie the Riveter, who represented the women who worked in factories, and many who supported the war supplies and the war effort. It's pretty amazing how they created the Women's Auxiliary Corps, giving them an opportunity to serve in World War II just like the men, in addition to having great female artists who entertained the troops during the USO, both in the United States, who are recognized today. There's just so many great artists out there, including the Andrews Sisters, Judy Garland, and Betty Grable, who also starred in a lot of popular movies, including How to Marry a Millionaire and Coney Island. I love both the male and the female crooners so much, and how they had a soft, relaxing, romantic voice and that picked up so well on the microphone. And in fact, I play a lot of these well-known crooners and big band artists, both male and female, on my radio shows that I also produce, and really focus on these crooning artists on Saturday mornings. And I play a lot of their songs on the radio, talk about the impact that they make in their music careers and the wartime efforts as well. And my family, we all enjoy history in some way or the other, and I really enjoy learning about the music history, especially during the wartime era, during World War II, and learning about the life, the music career, and even experiencing the wartime contributions made by so many male and female artists, Glenn Miller, Bing Crosby, along with the Andrews Sisters and Dinah Shore. And little things like the interesting facts in the music are just the little things that make up my growing encyclopedia of musical knowledge. My autistic brain is full of music of the 1940s and beyond, along with learning some interesting facts about the artists and the music who made an impact during World War II. I'm always learning more about the music and the impact during the male and female crooners that both made an impact on their musical careers and what they did during World War II. Some of my favorite female crooners were the Andrews Sisters, one of the major female entertainers for the troops in the 1940s, along with many of their iconic songs that were memorable both for Americans and soldiers alike, including the famous hit Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B, Rum and Coca-Cola, and Don't Sit Under the Apple Tree with Anyone Else But Me. In fact, I like the Andrews Sisters' wonderful harmonies of Patty, Maxine, and Laverne Andrews. I recently picked up an Andrews Sisters record for $1, and it invites me to reminisce and stroll back in time to a simpler and more different time in life, which also gives me a picturesque feeling of what people were feeling during World War II. They may have had a difficult life to support their family, but they were truly one of the most successful female groups of the 1940s and made an impact during the USO during wartime. Another of my favorite crooners was Miss Dinah Shore, who began a difficult life with polio. She was so amazing and determined and thrived a great solo career. She sang on many radio stations with Frank Sinatra and Xavier Cugat Orchestra and signed to the RCA Victor Bluebird Records in the 1940s. Thanks to the success of Eddie Cantor, who gave Dinah Shore the attention and fame she needed, her career both in the music, movies, and television. Dinah Shore was also a key figure during the World War II efforts and participated in several USO tours in Europe and entertained the troops with songs like I'll Walk Alone and Blues in the Night. Dinah Shore is actually one of my favorite female crooning artists. She was awarded her USO medallion for incredible service during World War II and was even on record with Glenn Miller and the Army Air Force Band, so she definitely was a key player in entertaining the troops during World War II in the 1940s. Dinah Shore is truly an icon, and her career just kept on thriving after World War II, even into the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, with her countless movies and television programs. Dinah Shore had so many great songs that were #1 charting hits. She recorded a lot of well-known standards that we know today, including Baby It's Cold Outside and I Love You for Sentimental Reasons. I love learning about her music history and her impact during World War II. I also enjoy a lot of Dinah Shore's music and her marvelous voice with songs like I'll Walk Alone and Buttons and Bows, which is also a favorite of mine from 1948. She also went on to have some pretty incredible duets in the 1950s, including my favorite, which reminds me of my mom, A Penny a Kiss, A Penny a Hug, with another male crooner, Tony Martin, which was a top 5 hit in 1951. I enjoy that song. I love her impact of being the first woman to host a network television show, which was hugely popular in the 1950s, with her sponsorship and promoting Chevrolet vehicles, and even created the song and slogan, "See the USA in your Chevrolet." I also have a few Dinah Shore records from the 40s and the early 50s. I also really enjoy Dinah Shore's magnificent voice and her music that connects so much with the war efforts and those who enjoyed listening to her music back in the 1940s when it was popular. I really enjoy these male and female crooners and big band artists of the 1940s today. I even play some of the music on the radio shows as well, and love hearing both the music history and their impact during the World War II era, as it was reflecting what was going on during wartime in the 1940s, during that significant time in music history. I try to bring back good memories for those folks who may be in their late 70s or in their 80s and probably 90 years old or above, and try to bring back those good memories and simpler times during my radio shows with their timeless music that continues to live on, thrive, and was truly unforgettable. And I love hearing both the music history and their impact during World War II, as well as reflecting what was going on during World War II in the 1940s during that significant time in history. Well, today during Sentimental Journey, we've examined some of the most important female entertainers, including the Andrews sisters, Ella Fitzgerald, and Dinah Shore, who made an impact during the World War II era, and talked about what they did to support the war. You can find us on Facebook at Sentimental Journey. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.